Welcome again. This is our next video. This particular video focuses on the language study, alright, and this is a major project for this year, so some of you are only just getting onto it, but that's okay. Here are some of my tips. Don't forget, if you want to know a little bit more about your complex sentence structures and writing fluently, go to the essay writing video that was done on poetry analysis, because a lot of it is the same. Okay, so let's have a look at a couple of the tips that you need to follow for the language study. You need to be constantly going on about concrete to abstract. This idea of concrete to abstract is looking at how people use language in very concrete ways. For example, if we're talking about video games, the game is terrible. It's a pretty basic comment to say. Whereas if you're going to talk about something more abstract, like the company's latest version uses all the latest 3D technology that's a little bit more abstract, a little bit more a bit big picture stuff. Okay, so have a look at the concrete to abstract idea. Some other ways to talk about the same thing: everyday to specialised, or more spoken like to more written like. The difference is concrete to abstract is talking about the subject, the content of what you're talking about, which we call field. The everyday to specialised is, again, the more spoken like to more written like is the mode. Is it like text message? Is it like a phone call? Is it face-to-face chat? Or is it more like an essay? And what you'll notice on the internet, even though it's written up, a lot of it sounds like it's verbal. Okay? The big picture stuff, always don't forget, when you are going through in your essay or your language study, please make sure you start with some large concepts. Think about what it is, the big picture that you're talking about first, right, rather than getting straight into the details. Okay? And then you've got complex sentence structures as usual. And there's one more thing I want to show you. You need to be able to understand the difference between the kinds of things you're analysing. Just remember, like any good investigation, you need to have some sort of contention, some sort of thing that needs to be proved. So but when it comes to the language study, the specific analysis has to be based on the communication of language, which is why you've got your language samples, and you're looking at that. But the things you've got to look at, things like your specific words. What kind of words are being used by the speaker, or if it's an interview by a particular person who's writing something for a magazine, a professional magazine, what kind of words do they use? Do they use the simple words that every person on YouTube uses, or do they use a little bit more sophisticated vocabulary? That's the kind of stuff you've got to analyse as well. Phrases, is it as simple as saying, this computer game is the worst I've ever seen? It's a bit simple, but what kind of phrases do they use, and are they more complex? Also look at how sentences are formed. A couple of ways to look at words. You need to look at nouns, okay, so the simple to complex nouns and noun groups. Don't forget, a noun is usually just a single word, but a noun group is a longer, bigger picture, but it fits into the category of a nominal group, like it's the subject matter. Okay. Lastly, we're going to look at verbs. What sort of verbs are used? Can I just quickly remind you, there are acting words. These are a little bit more like your concrete stuff, like hitting a table or even releasing a computer game is actually pretty physical. It's an act. Okay, sensing, so things like feel, want, influenced by, these sort of things. Then you've got the saying words, so anything is reporting someone else saying something or writing something. So, the Daily Mail reported on the sudden rise of violence stemming from computer game use. Bad article. They should never be writing articles that are blaming computer games for, mainstream violence. But anyway, reporting things. Do you know what I mean? And lastly, relating, this is a really important one. You've got to know that the word is, or are, and words similar to this are used very heavily in your abstract, complex sentences. Then I'll give you an example on here. So let's go straight into it. Let's have a look at our example. Alright, so you've got an introduction. This is such a large piece of writing, such a large investigation. The language study really requires 2 introductory paragraphs. The first one is your overall introduction. Let's read it. Language, now this is a sample, a student sample, so it's closer to the B level, and I'll give you a couple of tips as to how they could have done it better and possibly got an A. Language study, Battlefield 3 reviews. So we're just analysing the language of reviewing, which is actually partly based on an article that you've come across regarding the language reviews, but I won't go there yet. So language exists in a context. Alright, one may think that the different types of languages refers to languages as in English or Japanese. For this student, I guess that's the immediate thing they thought of. That is true. However, language also relates to a way to communicate effectively to people that speak the same language. Now he's quoted here, you should really use your bracket system after referencing. They've used footnoting, but whether they get penalised for that or not, I'll leave that in for now. Written, oral and body language are important tools for sharing ideas, feelings and commitments. Your group is made up of people who share a common interest and commitment, and yet perhaps see things from a variety of perspectives. Alright? So you can do your searches, you can use the resources I've given you to find some really interesting things that you can quote to support your argument. In this context of the online world of computer gaming, the way that people communicate and the language they use differs from other groups that still use the same language, yet it is the perspective and the common interest shared. We make language choices, very good word to use. Start talking about language choices. Think about the context of your language samples, okay? That's that whole thing about language exists in a context. If you start your language study with that line, that's totally fine. Okay, I want everyone to maybe perhaps try that. Alright, we make language choices every time we communicate, depending on who the language user is, right? And to whom they are communicating. The different choices are made. So in the context of online gaming, there is a range of spoken and written texts. Okay, so what we started to see here is started to talk about the big picture idea of language itself, that language exists in a context. You're talking about language groups, language users, okay, and the shared experience, alright? Now the word users appears here somewhere as well, but for the language user. These are all kind of keywords you want to use. That's what the language study is about, isn't it? Alright, think about your language study and the topic you've chosen. Who are the users and what context? In which context do they exist, and what are the language choices they use? When we say language choices, we don't actually mean that every time they say something, they're actually computing in their mind, oh, this is the way I've got to say it. It's actually just a natural pattern of behaviour that already exists, and the language choices pretty much follow those existing patterns and habits. Alright. So what I was going to say here is you started to talk about this whole language study in terms of the concrete to abstract, the more spoken-like to written-like, so please make sure you cover that. Have they used some complex sentence structures? Okay, so maybe some ION words or MENT words, commitments, that's actually a quoted one, so well done there, and so on. Let's just finish this introduction so we can see what the next paragraph should look like. Here we go. Now we get into the specifics. Okay, so don't forget, big picture, general to specific. We're now getting to the specifics here. We don't even know what the game is, except for the title, until we get to the bottom part of the introduction. That's good practice. General, big picture, down to specific. Got that? So here we go. Okay. For example, when looking at reviews for Battlefield 3, there will be concrete and trusted information with very formal written communication from a professional game reviewer addressing to the wider gaming community. That's at one side of the scale. Then he continues on. A gamer comment could use much spoken-like language, very colloquial use, of language. They can be very opinionated, targeting only other players and not the wider community.